The verses of Goat and Fish. Once upon a fence, there was one called Michael Allen. And fence-sitter Michael Allen was always going from this land to this sea, spreading its own verses and searching for verses true. But after all that spreading and all that searching, it sat on the fence, so unpleasantly sat on the fence. And on one side of the fence, where sat the fence-sitter, was a mighty goat. And on the other side of the fence, where sat the fence-sitter, was a mighty fish. And the goat and fish did verses, and the fish and goat did verses. Goat versus fish. 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 Your fence looks very pleasant, said Goat to fence-sitter. But would you not feel more pleasant if you chose goat and did versus the fish? But I do not want to choose goat, for what if I choose goat, but I am truly a fish? Cried the fence-sitter. Very pleasant looks your fence, said fish to fence-sitter. But would you not feel more pleasant if you chose fish and did versus the goat? But I do not wish to choose fish, for what if I choose fish, but I am truly a goat? Cried the fence-sitter. Your fence-sitting is the envy of all fence-sitters, said Goat to fence-sitter. But would they not envy you more if you chose fish, and then we could versus, forever goat versus fish? But I do not wish to versus goat, for what if I versus goat, but I am truly versus fish? Cried the fence-sitter. Your fence-sitting is the envy of all fence-sitters, said fish to fence-sitter. But would they not envy you more if you chose goat and then we could versus forever fish versus goat? But I do not wish to versus fish, for what if I versus fish, but I am truly versus goat? Cried the fence-sitter. And Goat and Fish did forever verses. And one Michael Allen did sit on the fence, suffering from the verses within. "Oh, Goat versus Fish! Oh, Goat versus Fish!" Michael Allen cried from atop the fence. "My verses are so unpleasant! My verses are so unpleasant! Pleasant as they say is the fence on which I sit, my verses are unpleasant still. Why, Goat versus Fish? Why, Goat versus Fish?" And just at that verses, the goat, the fish, and the fence-sitter heard a pleasant verses. "Goat and goat versus fish, goat versus fish, goat versus fish. Goat and goat versus fish, goat versus fish, goat versus fish." It was Goat versus Fish, the goat fish, standing mightily, awesomely, and absurdly before the goat, the fish, and the fence-sitter. And Goat versus Fish did say, "In the beginning, there was Goat versus Fish, the goat fish. And Goat versus Fish said that there should be goat and that there should be fish. There is no Alpha or Omega. There is no black or white. There is no good or evil. There is only goat and fish and goat versus fish. You have many questions, yes? Who is Goat versus Fish? What is Goat versus Fish? Why is Goat versus Fish? But there is only one question. Are you goat or are you fish? And the goat said goat, and the fish said fish, and the fence-sitter, Michael Allen, sat on the fence. Goat versus Fish did celebrate goat, and Goat versus Fish did celebrate fish, and then did look to the fence-sitter. Surely a pitiable fence-sitter such as you does not wish to be part of Goat versus Fish, said Goat versus Fish. Surely I do wish to be part of Goat versus Fish, cried the fence-sitter, for do I not call out to Goat versus Fish in my most pitiable verses? And Goat versus Fish saw that it was so. Surely a pitiable fence-sitter such as you does not spread the verses of Goat versus Fish, said Goat versus Fish. Surely I do spread the verses of Goat versus Fish, cried the fence-sitter, for do I not wear Goat versus Fish? Is Goat versus Fish not written upon my t-shirt onesie for all to see? And do I not ask the ones I know if they are goat or fish? And Goat versus Fish saw that it was so. Surely a pitiable fence-sitter such as you does not follow Goat versus Fish, said Goat versus Fish. Surely I do follow Goat versus Fish, cried the fence-sitter. For do I not follow Goat versus Fish at GoatVsFish on the Instantgram and the Twitterver and the Book of Faces and the Twitch and the YouTube and the Ite-Oons and the Spotify? And do I not rate and review the Goat vs. Fish podcast on the Ite-Oons? And do I not go to GoatVsFish.com to see the dates and times of all future verses? And Goat vs. Fish saw that it was so. Goat versus Fish was soon to take pity on this fence-sitter, to take pity on the pitiable fence-sitter. But Goat versus Fish was still Goat versus Fish. Surely a fence-sitter such as you rejects Goat versus Fish, for you do not choose goat or fish, even in the presence of Goat versus Fish, the goat fish. Even when Goat versus Fish itself asks you the one true question. You sit on the fence. Why do you sit on the fence? Why do you sit on the fence? asked GoatVsFish. And the fence-sitter Michael Allen sang most pitiably. I want to be, goat and fish. I want to be, goat and fish. Oh, can I be, goat and fish? Oh, can I be, goat and fish? And GoatVsFish thought to take pity on this fence-sitter. But GoatVsFish was still GoatVsFish. And GoatVsFish said these verses. All the ones are either goat or fish. All things are either goat or fish. All is either goat or fish. What makes you think you are such specially verses that you ask GoatVsFish to be both goat and fish when all other ones must choose goat or fish? And the fence-sitter Michael Allen looked up from the fence and said, It is my verse day. It is my verse day. It is the versary of my first verses. The day I did come into being with GoatVsFish. The day I was but a smallest one, never having heard the one true question. Never having heard the verses of GoatVsFish. Pondering how to go about my verses. And I ponder even now. For GoatVsFish is so GoatVsFish that I feel as a new one, only now just hearing of GoatVsFish, as I witness GoatVsFish from atop my fence. And GoatVsFish saw that the fence-sitter did wish to be a part of GoatVsFish. And GoatVsFish saw that the fence-sitter did spread the verses of GoatVsFish. And GoatVsFish saw that the fence-sitter did follow GoatVsFish. And GoatVsFish saw that the fence-sitter did wish to be both goat and fish. And though GoatVsFish does ask if a day is a goat or a fish, GoatVsFish saw that it was the fence-sitter's verse day, a special verses for any goat or fish. Let it not be said that GoatVsFish never took pity on the pitiable fence-sitter, said GoatVsFish. For on this verses, the versary of your first verses, and only on the versary of your first verses, GoatVsFish asks you this one question. Are you goat and are you fish? And the fence-sitter leapt from the fence and embraced both goat and fish. I am goat and I am fish. I am goat and I am fish. I am goat and I am fish. I am goat and fish, cried the goat and fish. And GoatVsFish was pleased at the pleasantness of this goat and fish. And GoatVsFish looked upon the goat and fish and said, On this, the verse day of goat and fish Michael Allen, GoatVsFish takes pity on any one who would wish to be both goat and fish. Is that so? Asked goat. Is that so? Asked fish. It is so, said GoatVsFish. So Goat and Fish did ask the goat that was beside the fence, that the fence-sitter did leap from. Are you Goat and Fish on this special verses? And the goat said, I am Goat. I am versus Fish. I am not Goat and Fish. I am a proud and mighty goat. This is Goat versus Fish. And Goat versus Fish was pleased. So Goat and Fish did ask the fish that was beside the fence that the fence-sitter did leap from, are you Fish and Goat this special verses of Fish and Goat? And the fish said, I am a fish. I am versus Goat. I am not Fish and Goat. I am a proud and mighty fish. This is Fish versus Goat. And Goat versus Fish was pleased. And as Goat versus Fish emanated out into the verses, Goat versus Fish did say these verses to Goat and Fish and Goat and Fish. And on this, the verse day of fence-sitter Michael Allen, we ask the one question, are you Goat and are you Fish? And the ones may choose Goat and Fish, or Goat or Fish. But the one that chooses neither Goat nor Fish, nor Goat and Fish, is a fence-sitter, And on the verses that is not the verses of Goat and Fish, if you choose Goat and Fish, then you sit on the fence. Then you sit on the fence. And the goat are versus the fish, and the fish are versus the goat. This is Goat versus Fish. This is Goat versus Fish. And the Goat and Fish and Goat and Fish did celebrate Goat versus Fish, and always thank Goat versus Fish. Are you Goat and Fish? 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 Are you Goat and are you Fish? Are you Goat and Fish? Are you Goat and Fish? And it was written, and it was written. You who listen. Goat versus Fish still speaks directly to you. Even you can take part in the verses of Goat and Fish this September 9th. Go to GoatVsFish.com and scroll to see future verses to find out where and when the verses shall be.
Goat versus Fish is, I need you to like, subscribe, share, comment on all Goat versus Fish platforms, YouTube, iTunes, Facebook, Instagram. Please find out what you are. It is very important to know whether you are a goat or you are a fish. It will change your life.
The Goat vs. Fish podcast is recorded at the Comedy Store Los Angeles, a place of Goat vs. Fish.